last time, it was better if somehow it wasn't being displayed in presentation mode because they couldn't see the
Yeah, we do full screen.
Okay.
That was the issue we had last time. Share screen, entire screen.
Okay.
It's infinite recursion. The screen displaying itself. I didn't know.
A pair of mirrors.
Yeah. Okay, I think you can stop.
It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
And also,
let's see. I'm gonna keep this. I think I need to choose pattern.
let me know when it's working. Never seen a computer do that before. It's really cool. The infinite reflections on each other.
Okay, I think you can start to knock this over.
Okay.
So, how does this
It's just mic. It just looks big. I'm going to send the URL to Chris and anybody else so that they can join it.
Okay, so you want me to go ahead and start?
I'm going to wait a minute, see if I
okay. Can I hit this hide button or not?
Yes.
Okay. Well, then I'm hitting. I noticed Turin last week he left it up and it was. I thought, can he hide that or not? Well, while we wait for other members to join, I just wanted to say briefly that I'm going to be giving my the oral part of my qualifying exam Monday, if not next week, but the week after, the 29th. And I'd like to take this opportunity to present it to all of you. And I greatly welcome any suggestions for improvement. If there's something you didn't understand very well, if there's a different order you think I should present things in, if a figure's unclear, I've got about a week to fix anything, so I've got time. So feel free to give me any comments that you feel could improve it. I'd greatly appreciate it. And thank you all for being here. We'll get going and just.
I'm just checking if I can join in so I know the others can join in.
Oh, okay.
Can you just quit this window? We'll see the Hangout, see if I joined in. I think I should be there.
Wrong button. All right, here? All right, here. You mean the infinite?
Yep, I can see me. You can see me.
Yes.
Question.
Very.
Probably create a singularity and crash the system. Sounds.
Seems like it stopped doing it. Is this the window you wanted me to open, or is there another one?
Yeah, I'm just trying to see if I can hear you.
Oh, okay. All right, testing. Can you hear me? Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully, we won't have the feedback thing. Oh, no feedback. That's good.
Last time I was doing it on this machine. Remember, there was no mic on that computer.
Oh, okay. That's why we had the feedback?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, you can, I sent the link.
Okay.
And, I can check if they join in here, so you can start.
Okay.
Started late again. Sorry, I had a meeting. I couldn't come here earlier.
That's okay. We'll make do. Well, did you say I could
Go ahead, start.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, thanks everyone. So my talk's going to be about a Lagrangian analysis of mid-latitude air-sea interaction associated with mesoscale oceanic eddies. It also happens to be the title of the abstract that we submitted for a presentation at the AMS conference in January. So what is the goal of this research? A couple things. One is to analyze the effect oceanic eddies have upon the lower atmosphere in the Gulf Stream. And then compare observational results with coupled models to see if the same effect is found. And as you can see in the image above, there's an example of some oceanic eddies. You can see the Gulf Stream coming up off the coast and going north past Florida, and you can see many eddies embedded in there. And these are the type of features I'm talking about. This gives you an idea of what they look like. The key paper that did this work previously was by Frenger et al. In 2013. And what they did is investigated mesoscale oceanic eddies with observational sea level anomaly data south of 30 degrees south only. That was the region they looked at. So that's mainly the Agulhas current region, but they didn't investigate just the Agulhas. They investigated all eddies south of 30 degrees. And they did the same thing. They co-located atmospheric observational data with detected eddies. And they found, the key finding was that anticyclonic eddies can locally increase the rainfall rate, the surface winds, and the cloud cover, and vice versa is also true. Cyclonic eddies can do the exact opposite behavior. And here's the key figure from their results. You can see he has, Frenger et al. Has 4 features plotted: sea surface temperature, winds, cloud fraction, and rain rate. And the anticyclonic eddies are at the top, cyclonic eddies are on the bottom. And you can see the imprints of the eddies themselves with the concentric circles and the radius of the eddy being spread out. It kind of gives you an idea of how the anomalies are distributed corresponding to the eddy's location. So you can see there are local maxima with sea surface temperature, surface winds, cloud fraction, and rainfall rate in the anticyclonic eddy, and the exact opposite in the cyclonic eddy. And they analyzed many eddies, over 600,000 individual eddy realizations, and all of these are south of 30 degrees south, as I previously stated. And so the first thing I need to do for my research is to find the eddy somehow. Doing it by hand or looking at an image of sea surface ice or sea surface temperature would be far too tedious and take way too long, the massive amount of data I have to work with. So I need a detection scheme that will find them automatically, so I don't have to do it myself, looking at one image at a time. So I need to find an eddy detection algorithm to locate them. And so, consulting with Dr. Saravanan, I looked at a paper that Fagmus et al. Did in 2012. Fagmus was a PhD student at the University of Minnesota, working with a computer scientist named Dr. Vipin Kumar, who is doing a lot of informatics-type applications on climate science data. And one of the things this student did was develop a new eddy detection algorithm. There were several different methods of doing it. The one he referenced the most was from Shelton et al. In 2011, and he wanted to take their algorithm and improve it. One of the differences between his algorithm and theirs is that Shelton's requires a pre-processing of the data to kind of denoise it so that you can see the eddies better. His algorithm doesn't require that at all. And so you can just kind of take the sea surface height or sea level anomaly data as is without having to pre-process. The other thing is he shows an example from the figure here. he does a very good job of separating distinct features. Sometimes what can happen in Shelton's algorithm is that eddies that are located very close together will be automatically detected as one single eddy. But you don't want that because the different eddies could be of different types, and then you would miss them, and you wouldn't get as accurate of a result. So his program has a way of distinguishing eddies that are very in close proximity to each other. And as I said, they use sea level anomaly, sea surface height data as input and mainly find strong gradients. There are many other methods you can use to do this, but from the latest papers I've seen, this is the one that people seem to keep using because it seems to work well and is very efficient. And I've had some discussions with Dr. Chang and others about why sea surface height over sea surface temperature, and I did some more reading on it, and Fagmus claims in his paper, and Shelton did as well, the reason they preferred sea surface height, sea surface temperature is because there's a greater connection to the dynamic processes. If you look at sea surface temperature, there could be other things going on, like passing sea surface fronts, for example. And that could cause additional noise and make it more difficult to detect the eddies. Whereas the sea surface height is directly correlated to the dynamics of the eddy itself, because when the eddy spins, it will locally lower or raise the sea surface height. The sea surface temperature does happen to be a correlated local anomaly with the eddy, but it might make finding them more difficult because there's so many other influences that need to be taken into account if you were just using sea surface temperatures. That's the argument they made for why they used it, and that's also why I used it instead of sea surface temperature. And so I took Fagmus's algorithm and tested it out, and this is the region I'm looking at, which is from 25 degrees north, 55 degrees north, and minus 80 west to minus 20 west, which is the Gulf Stream region. And you can see the eddies it detected. The cyclonic ones are magenta, the black ones are anticyclonic, and you can see these bounding boxes that the algorithm automatically detects where the eddy is located, and then the little circle in the center is what his program detected as the eddy center. And as you can see,
We can't really see that.
you can see what?
The color of it. Just,
Yeah,
you should take another color.
Oh, okay.
well, that helps.
Does that help a
That
bit?
helps.
The problem with the sea surface height gradients is that there's so many colors in there, so I had to pick a color that's different from red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and I thought of magenta and black.
It looks better on here. It just doesn't-
Okay. Okay.
Projectors
I
are.
think another reason is you could avoid that grid lines. The
Yeah.
tiny tiling
Oh, the green
lines.
ones, yeah.
Yeah, they're not.
There's no need for that one. That actually puts a lot of points in the floor, right?
Uh-huh.
Background grid, the small squares.
Oh, okay. You'd like me to get rid of those because
Yeah.
it's easier to see?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
not needed.
But if you want to orient the, like
You could you have
audience, then you could have
You have
10-degree lines or something
right,
like
it's a
that.
1 degree line.
Yeah.
10-degree
Okay.
lines or 5-degree lines. So
Yeah, this is an old image I made a long time ago, so I wanted to put it back in just to show as an example, but I could clean this up if you think it's
what
too
is
messy.
the dashed line outside of the solid line? Each box.
Well, that was something I was experimenting with that I ended up not using. What that is kind of like an atmospheric boundary that I wanted to maybe have located slightly larger than the eddy itself. And so I could increase it by a certain percentage. And I toyed with that, but what I ended up finding is that too many of these atmospheric boxes were overlapping on each other, and so I wasn't really seeing the difference between the signal and the noise very well. So I kind of abandoned that idea because it wasn't working very well. So that's what this is showing. But the point I wanted you to really get from this figure, which I'm going to explain, is that it's detecting too many eddies in different regions. So one problem is there are too many eddies occurring outside of the Gulf Stream. So I think in its just pure stock form, it's too sensitive.
And can you please explain how it detects eddies?
It looks at a gradient of the sea surface height, and so whenever it finds a very strong gradient, it constantly does a threshold between the heights of, in terms of centimeters, minus 100 to positive 100, and then it slowly goes down in increments until it finds contours that are greater than that current threshold, and it keeps testing them until it finds a large enough gradient in sea surface height in a small enough location. And You can see Fagmus's paper for more details, but it also looks at the convexity of the feature. So it has to be somewhat round in shape. If it's not curved enough, he doesn't consider that an eddy. It's more kind of like a symptom of a front or just noise or something like that. Then it's not detected as. That's essentially how the algorithm works.
I think just because we're on the topic, I don't want to interrupt you.
Uh-huh.
I think it's good if you just give a very short explanation of how this works.
Okay.
Mostly because of two reasons. One, people know that you actually understand. You're not just using a black box.
Right.
And two, many of these algorithms, suffer from threshold effect. The fact that you have to actually put a threshold for them to be able to detect, and so once you intervene from the outside of the threshold, then you change the number of eddies that are detected. So is this one of the cases, for instance? That could be a legitimate question.
Okay.
So you should say if this is one of the cases or not. If there's tunables, you have to add.
I was actually about to discuss that.
So, and I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay, that's fine.
Because you did. So
Yeah.
let me just.
No, I mean, this is the kind of feedback I'm really looking for, so I do appreciate it. So one thing I want to show you is I think it's detecting too many eddies outside of the Gulf Stream in these regions. And the other problem is that there are small eddies that are being missed. So if you see before, eddies weren't being detected in those 4 locations by the algorithm. And so that's because the size parameter in the eddy algorithm is set to be a minimum of 30 pixels. I think that's too high of a threshold. And so I feel like that needs to be tuned. There's another problem in that, and Fagmus even admits this in his paper, that it's way too sensitive near the coastline. And so you often get these artifact eddies that are detected near the coast, as you can see up near Canada. Those shouldn't be there, because those aren't really eddies. And so this isn't going to work just in its basic stock form, so I needed to make some tuning and some changes. So one thing I want to do is decrease the minimum size to detect those smaller eddies that were missed. Another was to increase the minimum amplitude of sea surface height inside each eddy, so that the difference between the sea surface height magnitude found inside of the eddy box has to be a certain minimum. His was far too low, I think. And then I added a brand new feature into the program that would kind of fine-tune things even further, that would measure the difference between the maximum and minimum sea surface height found inside of a bounding box. And I found by playing with these settings, I could get a much better result, in my opinion. And then I could just tune these and experiment until I got an overall best solution. And this is what it looks like after being tuned. And as you can see, all 3 problems I talked about previously are now gone. So the noisy features that were existing outside the Gulf Stream aren't there anymore. Now these new smaller eddies are finally being detected, and they weren't before. And all the eddies that were in northern Canada are now missing. So I feel like I've combined the 3 to get a much better and more meaningful result for the detection. And there's another problem, though. If you'll notice, this is kind of a zoomed-in view of the previous plot. A lot of these eddies overlap with each other. And so you can have a problem where, if, for example, they were to overlap, then I need to detect which eddy I'm really trying to examine. So let me give you an example. If you look at these anticyclonic eddy bounding boxes, they overlap with a cyclonic eddy. Well, I don't want the cyclonic eddy to be included in the average inside the box, right? And so if I don't change the way the program works, then I'm going to add noise to the data, and that's not going to help my calculations. So I had to manually program it so that if this happens, if it detects that 2 different types of eddies overlap, I will then change it so that it will now correct it, so that now the cyclonic eddy is left to itself, and the anticyclonic bounding box now no longer includes the cyclonic region. So that way I can get a better separation between the signal and the noise. You have a question?
Do you use sea surface height or sea level anomalies?
Well, the way
2 different fields. If it is sea level anomalies, you never get into this kind of situation where you have cyclones within the anticyclones. This happens because you already have the long time mean included in the field. That's why you have situations where cyclones coming within the anticyclonic eddies.
Well, this could be my ignorance because I'm from an atmospheric science background, not an oceanography background, and a lot of the papers I've been reading kind of use sea surface height and sea level anomalies interchangeably.
They are two different things.
Okay.
So the difference is like sea surface height includes the long-time height.
Uh-huh.
So on top of that, if you add an anomaly, then this kind of situation can happen. But if you consider sea level anomaly, that only gives you the anomaly for that particular time.
At that particular location.
That particular location.
So the timing for that location removed.
Removed, exactly, yeah. So in that case, you never end up having this kind of situation.
But you want to use that to identify eddies, because eddies are not defined by the anomaly.
I guess probably
the timing is like, like if you have Gulf Stream, it will have a, like gradation.
No, let's say you have an eddy, okay, it moves. You don't want to subtract a different mean each time it moves.
No, the mean is the same over time. It doesn't change.
But you say it changes with location.
It's a spatial pattern. It doesn't change.
That's a problem because let's say in the real ocean there's an eddy and it's moving, right? So if it's here, you subtract a certain value, and if it's there, you subtract a certain value. So the anomaly is different, although the eddy hasn't changed. So it may not be the best thing to use for.
That is true, but I think what it's trying to do is, if in a situation like this, if you subtract the mean, then it will allow you to differentiate, probably will help you differentiate between cyclonic and anticyclonic. More easy.
That's my understanding. That's what the algorithm's already doing.
Okay.
And what happens is that the bounding box has to be a rectangle. It can't be a nonlinear shape. And so just by the nature of that, you'll have instances where a cyclonic eddy may or may not fall in the same location as a previously detected anticyclonic bounding box, which happened here and also happened over there. And so if I'm going to separate them out properly, I have to do that through this additional tuning and program that I use to analyze each eddy to make sure that isn't happening.
So what does the dashed line do? You said
so this is what it would have done before. The anticyclonic box would have taken a zonal average across the entire domain, including the cyclonic portion. But I don't want it to do that. Because if it's including the cyclonic portion, then the signal won't be as present. So what I had to do is instead say, okay, if you detect that two eddies are overlapping that are different types, I need to figure out which one is the more dominant box. And so the way I have it do that is I measure there's an algorithm in Python called point-to-point, where you measure the difference between the maximum and the minimum. So I take the maximum minus the minimum inside of this lower left-hand black box, and then I take the maximum minus minimum inside the cyclonic box, and obviously I will find that it's bigger in the anticyclonic box because it covers a larger range of values. So therefore I know, aha, the anticyclonic is the bigger box that covers more values, and the cyclonic box is a smaller box. So I need to have the cyclonic box isolated and cut out from the anticyclonic box that's not included in the averaging for the anticyclonic eddy. Does that make sense?
No, but I didn't understand. What's the dashed line, though?
It's just a visual example to help you understand.
I think you mean probably showing the way it calculates the average.
Right.
Oh, okay. I thought you were cutting the box with the dashed
line.
Yeah.
No. That wasn't necessarily clear.
It's just
because you said it.
If you're doing a zonal average, you're going to do
I get it.
Okay.
I get it.
So the zonal average would have looked like that before, but I don't want it to include the cyclonic portion. So after I edit it with this program that automatically detects when they overlap, it would now look like this instead, which is what I wanted. And so that's another thing I had to fix. And then I co-locate the atmospheric observational data with these detected eddy bounding boxes. And there's a lot of different data sets and models that I ended up using, so this part I'm going to go through them. One of them was the CESM, or Community Earth System model. I used a portion of the 100-year run that was done between March 2nd, year 45, and October 1st, year 49. It is a global domain, so this is a global model run. And here's some metadata about the model. The atmospheric component was 0.25 degree grid spacing in the horizontal. The ocean component was 0.1. It had the data I was looking at was a daily temporal resolution, and there were 30 vertical levels for the atmosphere and 62 for the ocean. And essentially the model is CAM5 with the spectral element coupled with POP2. And hasn't been reviewed yet, but Small et al. 2014 has submitted it to James if you want to see further details. I know it hasn't published yet, but it is ongoing. And another model run that I looked at was the WRF ARW coupled with ROMs. That was a winter run done by Jen Shan between December 1st, 1981 and March 31st, 1982. And that region was only the Atlantic Ocean, which included the Gulf Stream region. And it had two runs. One was 9-kilometer horizontal resolution, and a second was with a 3-kilometer nest embedded inside it. And the data that I examined had a temporal resolution of every 2 hours. And these are the parameterizations that were used inside of both model runs. And here's what the domain looked like. So you can see that the ROM's domain was slightly inside the WRF to prevent any sort of boundary issues, and then the 3-kilometer nest was over the same region that I was investigating, for the most part. Then I compare these model results to observational data. So for the observational data, I use sea surface height / sea level anomalies. Again, you could help me clear this up. The website kind of calls it both, so I don't really know what term to use, whether should I use sea surface height or sea level anomaly. You're telling me it's a really big difference.
Two different things.
Okay. All right. Well, which one do you think they mean?
It really depends on what you want to do at the final node. Like if you just concerned about the eddy amplitude, maybe good to use a sea level height. But if you want to precisely count the number of eddies, then SLA is the best, because it removes the mean and gives you the anomaly. So every single eddies will be counted there.
I think I'm using the anomaly then. So
it removes a multi-year mean?
Like, yeah.
Climatological.
The VISO said the sea level anomalies remove a climatological mean.
Then it's probably SLA. Then.
Yeah, okay.
I guess you may be okay as long as you're not trying to track eddy. That's when it gets wrong. The amplitude will change because it's a mean is fine. If you're just identifying snapshot eddies, which is what you're doing, maybe okay.
This is why I found it so confusing, because all the journal articles would use the two terms interchangeably all the time.
It's very complicated. I mean, none of the journal publications will tell you clearly this is the product that we used from our website. Nobody's going to tell you that. It's very confusing. And
yeah,
if you go to the
it
website,
is.
there are at least like 20, 25 products listed.
Yeah.
And you could see from SLA, SSH, MSLA, then dynamic topography, and a lot more of that.
Yeah, it is confusing.
So it takes some experience and trials to figure it out.
All right. Well, I think I should replace sea surface height with sea level anomaly, because I think that's a more accurate description. Okay, so I'll do that next time. I'm also using Reynolds SST for the sea surface temperature. And what's good about these data sets, and the reason I picked them, is that they also have a horizontal resolution of 0.25 degrees, and it's a daily temporal resolution.
So just to clarify that, so when you download, is it an HCDF file? What format is it?
Yeah.
What's the name of the variable?
Sea level anomaly.
That probably determines that.
Right. But the problem is, in the journal articles I read, like Chelton and Bagmus, they said sea surface height, so that's why I got confused.
But I guess if it's negative or it's always positive.
Yeah.
They also provide sea surface height data. Obviously.
Right.
Yeah, it's not the SLSM, it's the MADT, the absolute dynamical.
Yeah, I didn't need that. Yeah. Okay. Because that includes the ocean floor. I'm not really interested in the ocean floor for locating eddies, so that wouldn't be necessary. Okay, and the range I chose for a variety of reasons was January 1st, 2006, December 31st, 2010, mainly because all the data I've been looking at was all available in that time period, because some satellites came online at different times. I also wanted a data set that was about the same length as the CESM I looked at, and also had all those satellites available, and was somewhat more recent, so that's why I chose that range. It was a little arbitrary. The rainfall data came from TRIM, has a 3B42 product, and the 10-meter surface winds came from the CCMP dataset, and they have the same features: horizontal resolution 0.25 degrees, daily temporal. The wind was actually 4 times daily, so I just took a daily average, and the same time period. And last, for the radiative cloud, the cloud fraction data, I took it from the OMI or a TOMS satellite. And the reason I chose that is because it had the same features, which was nice. So I could compare them all fairly at the same resolution without having to do any kind of downscaling. Now, the zonal averaging procedure works like this. I calculate a zonal average for each latitude by assigning each longitude point inside a cyclonic or anticyclonic or otherwise bounding box. And then I have to compare that to something. And so after some trial and error, I decided on a weighted average. And the way that works is I calculate a weight for each longitude and normalize that based on the frequency of an eddy versus non-eddy location for better comparison. So here's a visual example. You can see there are these weights on the right side of the screen, and the weights that were used are plotted. And so this is just an average for whichever data set I happen to be looking at, whether it's observational or model or whatever. So each one has its own weighting. And at each coordinate point along the longitudes is the frequency of an eddy bounding box being located at that point. So you can kind of get an idea of where all the eddies are occurring. And the reason I needed to do that is because otherwise the overall average was usually far outside the average of either the cyclonic or the anticyclonic, and it wasn't a very meaningful comparison anymore. Because especially outside of the Gulf Stream, where you have much warmer water, the cold water coming down from northern part of Canada, for example, along the west coast or along the east coast, would skew the average downwards, and then it would make it more difficult for me to compare how these eddies are doing compared to the overall atmospheric mean.
See, this could be your climatological mean on a much shorter time scale.
You think that's, well,
and also this could be a
it's not
threshold
quite the
boundary.
same though. So that's,
no, it's not quite the same.
Yeah.
But it can also be a threshold,
okay.
right? Because if this value changes spatially too, then you're going to detect more or less eddies.
This isn't used in the detection part of the program. This is used, no, this is used just as a comparison between the cyclonic zonal average and the anticyclonic zonal average, and their overall mean to compare both two. It's not used in the detection at all.
Okay, so it's a validation.
Maybe you want to give some symbols on a simple formula.
It's a bit confusing. What is the eddy active area? How does the eddy active area corresponds to the shading in this one?
Because these are the locations where cyclonic and anticyclonic eddies were located most often. And then at each latitude, I normalize the weight of each longitude point by how often an eddy was located at that location. Does that make sense? So the weights are going to be greater in areas that have had eddy activity and less in eddies that have been not. So I weight the data when I make a weighted mean average to compare to the cyclonic and anticyclonic.
So can I say eddy frequency? That makes sense.
Yeah, the frequency of eddies.
Right.
You're basically weighting it by the frac frequency.
That's more.
Yeah, it's
straightforward.
It's a little confusing the way you said that. It's a long sentence, I think. Yeah.
It's eddy frequency. You say it's like, how frequently an eddy occurs in a box.
Regardless of type, yes.
Yeah, that's eddy frequency.
Okay.
That's more, like intuitive.
Okay.
So it is weighted on this weights at least.
Yeah.
So computing the zonal average. Jesse said why he was doing it. If you don't do that, you get the non-eddy regions dominating the zonal average.
So it makes it more difficult to have a meaningful comparison. That's why I had to do that. Because originally I didn't do it at all. I just did an overall mean. But the mean ended up being far outside the average of the eddy activity.
Well,
because
why you need this comparison.
I think you become clear when you show it.
Yeah, it will become more
because
clear.
that is still not clear.
Yes.
This is like a histogram of eddies. Is that what this is?
In a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can
So
see the
why
most
don't you
active areas in there.
I feel like so the Gulf Stream is just all blue. Shouldn't you change the range of the color bar maybe to highlight that area?
Yeah, that's true. You're
Like
not
you have
using
a
the
log
color
scale
bar.
or something?
This is a very common problem. Like whenever you show a map for Gulf Stream or Rocio, people always tend to locate that distinguished feature there. Now I know that there are a lot of eddies associated with Gulf Stream, but I can't see any highlights in that area. That's one of the reasons I was asking for the details of this figure.
Well, does this outline help? Is the most active area so you can see it better?
Yeah, that's good. But I feel like there's probably even more
And
more things going on that we can't see.
There are a lot of eddies always occurring at the northern corner. North.
Is that an edge effect?
Yeah, those, remember, these are weights. They're not overall frequencies. They're normalized weights. So what that is
Although
saying
you're
is that,
normalizing at each latitude.
yes. So the weight in the upper right-hand corner, there were probably a few
Yes,
eddies
so-
that occurred at that longitude, but there were no eddies that occurred at any other longitude at that latitude.
It's the frequency, but renormalized at each latitude.
So what's in the denominator when you normalize? The total for that latitude, or?
Yeah, total for that latitude, not
Yeah,
for the
for each individual latitude, it's a normalized weight. And so that's why you have those artifacts up in the northern edge. Because eddies only occurred there and nowhere else. So the weights are very, very high.
It is equivalent to a fund watch, right? So,
weighted.
Thanks. well, weighted. If eddy is there for 50 years over 60, you know, of course the weight will be higher. So
No, actually, the reason this is not what was done initially. Initially, Jesse just took his own latitude. What happens is we want to compute properties over cyclonic eddies and properties over anticyclonic eddies compared to mean conditions.
Right.
We expect the mean to lie between cyclonic and anticyclonic. And actually, if you do the zonal mean, it won't. Because it'll pick up all the stuff where there's no
That's right,
eddies
that's
happening.
That's the
So
problem.
you
That's why I
want
had to
the
include
mean
this.
where eddies occur.
But that's why if you refer to the anomaly, you should be able to see that. Right? The anomaly already has the mean or the average removed.
Not in the atmospheric data, it doesn't. No.
On the atmospheric data. Yes.
The anomaly
I agree.
with respect to the zonal average. That's the problem. You don't want the zonal average. You don't care about regions where there are no eddies. They're not of interest to the analysis.
It's because we're taking a zonal average we have to do this. That's the
It's
reason.
almost
It has nothing to do with detection.
Yeah. Okay.
You can show where
Yeah.
the line lies.
Yeah,
with
we
the
can
curve.
move on. Okay, so one thing I wanted to show, just to give you an idea of how many eddies we're talking about here. This is how many eddies were detected by the algorithm over the time periods I previously discussed. You can see the four different groups, the CESM, the two WRF runs, and the observations. And in all four cases, there were definitely more cyclonic eddies being detected than anticyclonic eddies.
Why there's so few in WRF case?
Because they're short. They're only 4 months long.
Oh, it's you didn't normalize the time.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
That's very
okay.
misleading.
That's misleading because
Yeah,
that's,
that is.
it looks like WRF's a terrible model at getting.
It should be better actually.
Yeah.
So I mean, you might want to normalize it by the time
Okay.
per season.
Okay.
With the number per season.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just wanted the totals so that when people think of these averages, I'm just not just averaging 16 eddies. I mean, these are
Oh no,
thousands.
no, do per season and at the top put the actual numbers. So you can,
Okay.
because the first impression I get is WRF is not getting eddies, and
That's right.
that's not what ROMs do.
And I figured people would ask that, and I'd say, well, I remind you, it was a much shorter period of time because
Yeah,
the resolution is so high. So you're not going to have as many by nature of
No, but
being
that's
short.
that's just delaying.
Okay.
Just talk.
All right. And so here's some more detailed information about that. In the CESM, you can see that the locations that have the largest number of eddies on average is a little bit different than observations showed. And the area that had the largest number of anticyclonic eddies in CESM was somewhere about 38 degrees latitude, for example. But in the observations, it was more like 40. So the location of peak activity varied a little bit between the two.
You might want to, you don't have to show it, but keep it ready that pictures of the Gulf, the SST and CSM was an observation because Gulf seem maybe in a different location in CSM.
Okay.
Possible.
That could be causing the issue. But the other thing is that I can't use the same algorithm settings for all four because you have to tune it for every single one. Because you'll find when if you just keep it the same settings, the same amplitude, same minimum eddy size, and the same difference between the maximum and minimum, that you'll get too many or too few eddies. So all of them require different tuning. So that makes it a little bit more difficult to compare, but the zonal averages, the patterns should be meaningful inside each different run.
Do you need tuning even for the two WRF runs?
Yes. Yes.
That should not be.
All of them need tuning.
They're not very different.
They were a little bit because the higher resolution of 3 kilometers versus the 9.
But no, but that's only in the atmosphere, not in the ocean. The ocean model is the same.
Oh well. And the tuning probably ended up being about the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
Shouldn't need it.
But the difference between the WRF and the CSM is definitely going to be different. The resolutions being used are different. Okay.
Why there are only 5 or 6 eddies in the y-axis? The numbers are ranging from 0 to 6.
Oh, well, those are the zonal average. So at 40 degrees latitude, on average, you would see about, 1 eddy at 34, but you'd see 3.5 at 38.
Time span, like a month or in a year?
A day. This is daily.
1 day.
Yes, 1 day. Each snapshot. This is Lagrangian analysis. So I'm not tracking the eddies. I'm looking at snapshots of time. This is a daily
So
average.
if
what you
you're
would see.
traveling along a latitude circle, you encounter this many eddies.
In the region I'm exploring, from -80 to -20, and
In that launch.
in the Gulf Stream region, this is what I found, are the number of eddies that are occurring at different latitudes. So you can get an idea of how the distribution works from north to south. And here's the results for sea surface temperature. This is what I was talking about the weighted mean earlier. You can see it falls in between the anticyclonic and the cyclonic because you're wanting to look at how each eddy type affects the mean result. So in the CSM, you can see that cyclonic eddies, as expected, have a colder sea surface temperature than the weighted mean, and always colder than the anticyclonic temperature, which is an expected result. Now the observations, however, this difference wasn't quite as strong, and the only time it really became more apparent was at about 44 to 46 degrees latitude. But the main area of activity is going to be between 36 and 40 degrees, about where the Gulf Stream is located. Because if you take a latitude zonal average, that's where most of the eddies are going to be occurring most of the time. And these are results for rainfall rate. And just like in Frenger's paper, there was more rainfall associated at a higher rate with the anticyclonic eddies than with the cyclonic eddies. And observations, I found this too, but only it's more pronounced below 36 degrees latitude. But once you get into 36 to 40, the difference is very, very small. And this is comparing surface solar flux to cloud fraction. So what essentially we're trying to do here is the CESM run, because it was so long, only certain parameters were saved. And so there was no cloud fraction data. So what I used as a proxy is the solar flux. So what that's essentially telling you is if there's a lower surface solar flux, that's because there's a greater cloud fraction at the same location. So what you would expect is that anticyclonic eddies would have a higher cloud fraction or a lower solar flux in the case of CSM. And you can see that. The anticyclonic eddies have lower average net solar flux, or surface solar flux, while the cyclonic have a greater than average surface solar flux because there are fewer clouds there. And you see the opposite in the cloud fractions. Unfortunately, the weighted mean using the same technique was not falling between the cyclonic and anticyclonic eddies. And I think the reason for this is because the nature of it as a variable is very different than, say, sea surface temperature, because sea surface temperature is always going to fall in a range of about 280 to 300 degrees Kelvin. But cloud fraction can go all the way down to 0. And that can significantly affect the mean because it's only between 0 and 1. And so any regions outside of the Gulf Stream, even if they're not weighted as heavily, will significantly bring down that average. And I think that's why I couldn't get the weighted mean to fall in between the two. Maybe I can use some different techniques to make this look better, or a different mechanism to try to get a better average, but using the exact same technique, that's what I found for the cloud fraction. But importantly, the anticyclonic is showing a greater cloud fraction than the cyclonic, so that's good. And these are the surface winds at 10 meters. The CSM, you can clearly see a pattern of greater surface winds with the anticyclonic eddies and lower surface winds with cyclonic eddies. And observations, this pattern did hold for the most part, although between 36 and 38 degrees. The cyclonic eddies actually had greater surface winds, but in every other region, the surface winds were greater at the anticyclonic eddies. Now, I didn't have sea level pressure available, obviously, as an observation, because these eddies are occurring over the ocean. However, I could look at it inside of the war fronts. And so here's the difference between the WRF 9-kilometer and WRF 3-kilometer run. If you would expect that there would be a lowering of the surface pressure near anticyclonic eddies. And as you can see, that is the case for most latitudes, that the anticyclonic eddies have a lower surface pressure than the cyclonic do, in both cases. Although that does change a bit in the upper latitudes beyond 44 degrees. Another thing I looked at was the planetary boundary layer height. And in the WRF runs, this is where the signal was very clear. And definitely in the anticyclonic eddies, the planetary boundary layer height is raised by about 150 meters in comparison to the cyclonic eddies, especially in the most active region between 36 and 40 degrees latitude. So the signal there is very strong, and it was strong in both runs, actually. This was one of the most significant signals I found for all of the variables I looked at. Was the boundary layer height was very strongly affected by the eddy type. And these are the overall averages, basically kind of taking an average of all the latitudes, putting them here for you to see what these averages look like, because I thought if you look at a latitude zonal average, people probably want to see what the overall average looks like as well, so I included this. And you can see for rainfall rate, the anticyclonic has a greater quantity than the cyclonic in all 4 cases.
I think you might want to start from 0 because it's very much magnitude.
Yeah, I got confused.
The reason I did not want to start from 0 is I felt like the chart would actually be more difficult to read.
I agree, but then 0 and then you do something that shows the.
Yeah, you start from 0 and introduce the break. I mean, it's a little tricky.
Because otherwise, you know, it would look like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's not raining in CSM.
Yeah, but if you read the chart, it'll.
I know, but
you read it, and it's
you don't,
between 4 and 5.
People don't read the chart; they look at the picture. And then
Okay. So you're saying by not including the 0, I actually made it worse to read and not easier. I thought it was going to be.
No, I know you have a dilemma that if you start from 0, the differences are going to be minute. Right?
Well, what I say is people expect to see 0. I mean, they don't look at the numbers.
Uh-huh.
They just look at the histogram, then they say, okay, that must be 0. And then they say, what's going on? And then maybe they look,
That's what I did. I looked at the picture and then I looked at the numbers.
Okay. So you think I should include the 0? I thought it was easier to read this way.
No, but you can't include the 0. You want to show a break.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
All right. I'll think about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
right. And then this, I did the same thing, so you might not like it, but I started at 8 for the boundary. And the surface winds in all 4 cases, again, the anticyclonic eddies have a stronger surface wind than the cyclonic do.
Very little in observations, right? It's very small.
Yeah, it is a much smaller difference. The observations, it was more difficult to get a difference between the eddies, but Frenger found it was small, but it was statistically significant. The models,
It's
it
like
was easier.
0.1 meters.
Yeah, it's about 0.2 meters per second. It was small. The models were able to find this much more easily than the observations. And one thing I wanted to point out about these wind speeds in the WRF models, you're probably wondering, well, why are they greater than the observations or CESM? Because observations and CESM are similar, but the WRF are much higher. That's because the WRF runs were done during the winter only. And that region tends to be pretty windy in the wintertime. And so that's why you're seeing it.
Is there a way we can do winter-only comparisons? Because this picture will, again, people look at it and say, WRF looks terrible, CSM looks good.
Well, that's why I mentioned it.
I mean, I think for now it's okay, but for long run, for your defense, for your oral exam, it's fine. You can leave it this way.
Okay. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I just wanted to get the overall average.
For the paper, you might want to be.
I mean, you can do probably this in 2 steps. Can you hide the central histogram and then you click and then they come up and say, these are done only for the winter, so.
And the other way you can do winter-only analysis for the other 2.
Well, yeah, that would involve more work.
Yeah.
No need to do it now. But.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Here's the average for the SST. And you can see the same pattern where the anticyclonic had greater SST than the cyclonic eddies. And again, remember, the reason these are colder is because it was run during the winter. So don't think of it as some problem with forceability to model the sea surface temperature.
You can change the order of the picture, put SST before the winds. So that this is easy to show that it's winter right away. So show this first and then show the others.
Okay, that's a good idea.
One other way could be that you move CSM left with the
Yeah,
observation,
that's also
and then
good.
you partition the
That's
space
true. That's
vertically.
true. So the comparable ones are next to each other.
Yeah.
Okay.
Observation CSM, WRF 9 and WRF 3.
Okay.
And then you could probably split into and say winds and all.
Okay. And so now I want to talk about, now that I've shown you the results, what physically is happening. So Frenger explained this based upon looking at, there's a lot to see in this figure, I understand, but it has a lot of important information. One thing I want you to look at is the wind divergence pattern of the anticyclonic eddy. And you can see the divergence is, you have positive values in red, negative values in blue. There are much higher levels of divergence upstream of the eddy than downstream. And what that ends up doing is causing a drop in the surface pressure over the eddy because the winds are diverging before they hit it. And therefore what you end up happening is also decreased stability over the anticyclonic eddy's location. And as Frenger explains, you can see in the schematic of the rainfall, that leads to increased rainfall rates and increased cloud levels as well. And you have the exact opposite going on with cyclonic eddies, where you have a local high pressure over the cyclonic eddy because the divergence is actually occurring downstream of the eddy this time. And so that's basically what's explaining these results. And you can also see the fluxes corresponding to those localized pressure maximums. And in terms of the physical response to anticyclonic eddies, this actually has been studied in the literature before. Example from Small et al. 2008. There's a local SST anomaly that can cause an increase in the boundary layer height, which we saw in the WRF model runs I showed you. That response is very strong. And this kind of land breeze effect occurs with the winds flowing into the eddy due to that divergence occurring upstream of the eddy as the wind passes over it. This increased drag over the warmer water, since the anticyclonic eddies have a localized maximum sea surface temperature, slows the wind over the eddy, and that you have that divergence on the upwind side. And this leads to a positive wind stress curl on the northern edge and negative on the southern edge if you think about the way the winds rotate based upon the drag occurring on the upstream part. And so this is a schematic from White and Annis 2003 that helps visualize this more clearly. Another thing that was talked about in literature was a coupling of the crosswind SST gradients with that previously mentioned wind stress curl. And from Putrasahan's paper et al. In 2013, they found that the ocean eddies are vital to this coupling in vertical mixing mechanisms that are based more upon altering the boundary layers height and the way the winds flow inside and outside the boundary layer. The pressure adjustment mechanism was far more active on the mesoscale than when Putrasahan averaged. What Putrasahan did is they compared model runs of sea surface anomalies that were sea surface temperature anomalies that were smoothed out. So comparing these two model runs, they found if you have results coupled to the sea surface temperature that are smoothed out with no localized maximum minima, which would essentially be getting rid of the eddies, you don't find this pressure adjustment mechanism occurring anymore with sea surface temperature fronts. And so these eddies do have an active mechanism with this pressure adjustment occurring, must be occurring on the mesoscale instead of just larger scales that you see with these surface temperature fronts. They also found that there is a correlation between wind convergence, and there's a higher correlation between that and increased precipitation than just positive SST anomalies alone, as presented in this chart from Putrasahan's paper. So you can see that the slope is much stronger in the case of convergence of the 10-meter winds. So what they're arguing essentially is that the 10-meter winds are a much stronger driver of precipitation than just the sea surface temperature anomalies themselves. And what's also important is how these eddies modify the boundary layer. Shelton et al. In 2004 found that the sea surface temperature modified low-level winds because of the air-sea heat fluxes on the boundary layer itself. Another paper by Seo et al. 2008 examined the Western Arabian Sea, and they found the exact same pattern of perturbing the atmospheric boundary layer stability. And here's a chart from another paper by Burris et al. 2004, so they're all finding the same thing. The cyclonic eddies can increase winds in the upper boundary layer, but decrease surface winds due to the local SST minimum causing it. So you can see in the schematic here that there's a localized minimum sea surface temperature at minus 19 degrees longitude, and the vertical structure of the atmosphere and the wind profile, there are increased upper level winds, but the surface winds have decreased. And so consequently, that's also causing the boundary layer to decrease in height. So to summarize everything I've talked about, the key findings are that the model runs are mostly consistent with what Frenger et al. 2013 found. However, observations show a smaller difference between eddy types than model runs. There was more noise in them. These model results confirm the boundary layer height increase for anticyclonic eddies and a boundary layer height decrease for cyclonic eddies. The cyclonic eddies in my results were more common in the Gulf Stream than anticyclonic eddies. And the cloud fraction in observations was consistently higher, which confirms what Frenger was saying in terms of the way the mechanism works in terms of anticyclonic and cyclonic eddies. And here's where I discuss possible future work. One idea is to expand this study to the Kuroshio extension region and see if the same pattern holds, which is off the coast of Japan to the east. Another one is to do new coupled model runs to investigate the mechanisms involved at eddy resolving resolutions to see if we're seeing the same kind of behavior that the other papers are seeing in more detail, now that we know that the observational data and the model data are somewhat showing the same pattern. Further statistical analysis of the interaction between the eddies and the lower atmosphere. One thing I think would be interesting to try, none of the literature seems to really say anything about how the eddy's size or amplitude affects the atmosphere. And so I wonder if there's a difference in the effect based on the size of the eddy itself. Is the effect linear, or is it nonlinear? I don't think that's been explored yet, so I think that's something that might be interesting to look into further. Another idea that Dr. Sirvine and I were talking about was analyzing eddies as compared to their distance from the Gulf Stream instead of using that zonal average. Maybe that will give us a more insightful result, possibly. And another thing is to explore the correlation between the eddy sea surface height gradient versus the sea surface temperature gradient to see the difference between how these eddies impact the atmosphere as localized features versus larger sea surface temperature fronts, and see if that difference really is significant. And so anybody have any questions? That's my presentation.
John, you can go back to the Hangouts and see who's been on.
Okay.
Let's see. Yeah, Chris, Weichan, and who? Yeah. So Weichan actually had a question. She typed it there. You can see that. Why?
Why anticyclonic has greater rainfall rate? Well, if you refer back into this figure from Frenger et al., I think it explains it well. If you can see here, there's the anticyclonic eddy here, and as I explained, anticyclonic eddies have a local maximum sea surface temperature, but they also increase the boundary layer height, which allows more vertical mixing. And the sea surface temperature, the sea surface temperature anomaly here destabilizes the atmosphere a little bit, and that there's also a low pressure here, and so that causes convergence in the low levels, and that causes localized updrafts to form, which will bring moisture up into the atmosphere and allow it to cool as it rises to form increased rainfall. But you won't see that in cyclonic eddies as much. Oh, I'm so sorry. Because there's actually localized high pressure here, and that's going to keep the air from rising. So you won't see that rainfall in cyclonic eddies being positively affected. It's actually negatively affected. Hope that answers your question. Okay. Let's see.
Okay. You have volume control there? Can you
Yeah.
increase it?
Does that help?
Yeah, let's see. Do any of the other remote participants have questions? Let's ask them that.
Yeah, do you have any questions, anyone, or comments on how I could improve the presentation or anything you felt was not clear?
Can they even hear us?
Can you even hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. I have no questions.
Yeah, I have no questions.
I guess not.
I might have muted their microphone.
Well, it doesn't say they have, 'cause usually there's a little indicator there. Yeah, I don't think
Well,
they have.
let's see if they just ask them to say hi.
Can you guys say hi? Are you there? Say something.
Hi.
We're here.
I saw you waving, who?
We can't hear him.
Can you hear
I
me?
can't hear you. Can you say something?
Can you hear me?
Oh, he's saying. Okay,
He's
go
saying
to
something.
go to the settings at the top.
Uh-huh.
The present everyone. I think there should be settings. There. Get to the settings then. Settings.
Where is that?
Is that gear-like button next to the red phone button?
Keep going right.
All right.
Yeah, there.
One
Yeah.
more.
Okay.
Set to create. Go to the default sound. Next one.
Uh-huh.
Next to try no default's not working. Try place test sound. Okay, it's not working.
Yeah.
So the next
Change the default.
go to
to something
change the
else.
default to something else. No, that won't work. There's no microphone.
The last one.
Sorry, last one.
No. I guess we don't have speakers.
They are speakers.
Yeah.
It is loud.
Here we go.
Okay, we got it. Okay, now maybe you can hear that.
Okay, can I hear you guys? Can you talk, please?
Yeah,
Hi.
can you hear us now?
Oh, good. Okay, now we can hear you. Great.
Yes, we were
Sorry about
speaking.
that.
That's okay.
We couldn't hear you at all.
Okay. Does anybody have any comments or questions?
Not from me.
No. Yeah. Not for me too.
Okay.
Okay, at least it works.
Well, at least it
Yeah.
works, yeah.
Yeah, did you guys?
But,
It just has to heard the seminar well.
Did you guys hear it okay?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear really well. I
Okay.
think sometimes when people speak up in the room, maybe the folks sitting further away from the microphone, if they could speak up a little bit more, that might help.
Okay.
We got a fancy microphone this time. So.
Maybe we need more.
Okay, any questions from here?
I have a suggestion about a color bar.
Okay.
People didn't talk about color bars, but like the first figure you showed that had all the grid lines on it, and you're wondering what colors to make the lines when they show up. If that is the anomaly, because I was a little bit confused because you had.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, one of those.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
This one?
Yeah, like some of the cyclonic eddies are actually warm colors. If you're going by 0 as the critical value. So I don't know if this is anomaly or not. But you could use a diverging color map and just
So
red
you
blues.
use MATLAB for coding, right?
No, this is Python.
Okay, Python.
Yeah.
So one basic rule is like whenever you plot anomalies, normalize the color bar, minus 140 to plus 140.
Okay.
And then choose a color scheme which has two colors, like blue and red.
Yeah, with white in the middle.
White in the
diverging
middle.
color map.
Okay.
So, I mean,
Well, the reason I
Background feature was Python.
I see what you're saying. The reason I didn't put as much effort into the color scheme on this slide is I was just trying to put the point across as to how the eddies are being detected. I wasn't really focusing on how the eddies look themselves.
No, but if you have a bunch of oceanographers in the room,
Uh-huh.
they'll focus on the eddies.
Yeah, I mean, it just makes it easier to read.
Okay.
That's
So expand the range from minus 140 to plus 140, is that what you're
Or
saying?
you can make it just do like the extending point. You don't have to make it all the way to 140. It's kind of big.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just plotting the maximum value it finds. The maximum value is 40, so that's why it's.
Yeah, just make it centered around
I see what you're saying. Okay. All right.
This is what really confuses me because this plot is actually sea surface high. It's not sea level anomaly. That's why you see all the higher values right across the Gulf Stream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what it actually is a sea level anomaly, and I got confused about sea
So
surface
he's
height
saying
versus
it's
sea
not.
level anomaly.
It's not. This is sea surface high.
Oh, it is. Are you sure?
If it is sea level anomaly, you never see that kind of super reddish region. You
He's
only
saying it'll be roughly the same amplitude. You won't see the Gulf Stream. You take out the mean Gulf Stream.
Well, what if they were sea surface height anomalies? Wouldn't you see it then?
There's nothing like that.
Oh, okay.
There is sea surface height and then there is sea level anomalies.
Okay, that's it. There's no such thing as sea surface height anomaly.
But it might be an anomaly because it says sea surface height of the loop current like 80 centimeters. I think it's more than that.
Which one?
The high values in the loop current, sea surface height is like 80 that I see on it.
Yeah, here it
So
goes to
maybe this is-
140 or.
Okay.
So I have one question, like,
What?
why the eddies are square here?
Why eddies are square here?
Yeah, in the eddy region that you consider is a square or rectangle, right?
Yeah, the way the algorithm works, it finds a bounding box that has to be rectangular. So it picks as a longitude minimum and maximum and a latitude minimum and maximum.
That
And that's the bounding region.
Is it a rectangle or is it an ellipse?
Oh, it's a rectangle.
That's one of the reasons the cyclonic versus anticyclonic analysis cannot be yielding that kind of a difference, because this kind of analysis will include non-eddy regions anyway. Because eddies are circular in shape, right?
Yes.
So you'll be including some edge points which has nothing to do with eddies. That can seriously contaminate the analysis.
Well, in the model results, it seemed to be okay. You're right; it could, in theory, do that. I'd have to drastically change the way the algorithm program works in order to be able to do that. I don't know if that would be
Yeah, maybe because
efficient
I'm
use
biased,
of
because
time.
I spend a lot of time on the eddy tracking aspects in my earlier workplace.
Yeah.
And all the eddy tracking routines I reviewed or came across was circular shape. You define an eddy based on a contour or some sort of a circular shape. And next time, so here's the next question. So you got this box. How do you interpolate or consider the atmospheric data onto this box?
I just get the boundaries of the box. So it's got latitude and longitude points, and I just co-locate the atmospheric data to that box. That's exactly the same way Frencher did it.
You take all the grid points within that box?
Yeah.
Or you just find exactly the data within that box?
It's all the grid points in that box can
But you're
constitute
saying
part of the
atmospheric
average.
grid box might extend outside your ocean rectangle. That's the point you make, right?
There is a lot of details involved in this step.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure that that's one of the reasons why you don't see much difference between cyclonic and anticyclonic analysis. So I can show you that. Okay. So typically, suppose this is the eddy region, and what you are considering is something like this.
Mhm.
So just by definition, you are including all the points outside of the eddy from the other data set.
Right.
This is counted into the average, what all average is considered.
Mhm.
That's one problem. The other reason is, suppose this is the eddy, and say the eddy data set and the atmospheric variable that you are considering have two different resolutions. Then you can have different criteria for including the atmospheric variable within the eddy. One criteria is like, if the atmospheric grid point is within the eddy, take it, just like that. The other proper way of doing it is, think about the bounding box for this point. Then take only the area which is accounting within the eddy. So you may think that this is a smaller region, minute detail. But when you compute statistics for all the eddies, thousands and like thousands of eddies, this will add up to give a really bad result. So these kind of details are very important how you do that.
Well, how do you determine? That's the thing I played with. I tried shrinking the box, the bounding box.
The
I tried
box itself
shrinking.
is a really bad idea.
Yeah.
So box is, I mean, you can never get rid of this kind of situation. How will you fit a box in a circle?
So what
You
he's
can
saying
have-
is you could put the box inside the circle.
Inside the circle?
Yeah. That's what he said by shrinking it.
No, I don't think that's the way it is being done here, right?
But you said you tried shrinking.
Well, I tried both. I tried shrinking the box and expanding the box.
Okay.
When I shrunk the box, what happened is I missed the small eddies completely because the box was too small.
Yeah, okay.
Because the space, the
Maybe we can talk after this, because
Okay.
other ways is like you don't have to worry too much about small eddies. Like one aspect you are not considering here is the eddy lifetime.
Mhm.
Say you have a weekly data for Sisyphus height, and say
Actually,
you-
it's daily.
sorry,
It's daily.
okay, daily.
Yeah.
You identified one eddy on a say January 1 of some year.
Mhm.
There is no necessity that this eddy will exist in a nearby location on the next snapshot. So there is something called minimum lifetime for eddies.
Mhm.
And if you read Chilton's and other people's paper, they put something like 1 week or
I think it was 4
1 month or something like that. So typically people won't analyze anything which eddies, which has lived less than for a month.
Mhm.
Because the statistics computed over that kind of eddies will be not reliable. Because just this can be an artifact of data processing. An eddy existing only for one snapshot.
Mhm.
If this eddy can be tracked in the nearby location for say a few weeks, then you can make sure that that's a real eddy.
Mhm.
So basically, you compute the eddies, identify the eddies for each snapshot,
Mhm.
then link the eddies by tracking them, then apply the minimal life criteria. So I'm considering only the eddies which is lived for say five consecutive days, or 14 consecutive days,
Mhm.
and then do the analysis only for that eddies. Then your statistics will be much more strong and including all the eddies.
That
So
is-
these
that
are
is
only very
awesome.
minor ones. There are a lot of details like that when you consider this is for eddy tracking.
Yeah, that's why I found the tuning of the detection algorithm was very important, so that you don't include too many of those eddies that just disappear after one day. That's what the tuning helps reduce.
Yeah. So the point of this applying this minimal lifetime tracking is all your confusion and complication with the identification will go away in this stage. Because whatever you are struggling with is short-lived eddies. The moment you get rid of that short-lived eddies, like you don't have to worry about the minimum amplitude or maximum amplitude. Because the data processing is not that foolproof. So you can have artifact eddies there.
All right, well, I think I've taken enough of everybody's time. Thank you for coming, and have a good weekend.
You can end the hangout.
Okay.
So that you can say bye to everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
See you later.